It's the end of the global supply chain as we know it. But what a difference a whole year makes. The U.S. inflation rate was at 1.4% when Joe Biden took office as president back in January 2021. In just 15 months, it has since risen rapidly to a 40-year high of 8.5%, the result of global supply chain issues. Many had hoped that those issues would resolve themselves as the pandemic eased up, but obviously that didn't. But hopes that inflation would prove transitory have been dashed by current events in Ukraine and Shanghai. Events which prove not only that the supply chain crisis is ongoing, but that it spells the end of most global supply chain issues as we know them. Now, Putin's invasion of Ukraine sparked geopolitical tensions that had not been seen since 1989. Russia's aggression and the West's anti-Russia sanctions have shattered the key foundations of global supply chain issues that had been built after the fall of the Berlin Wall 30 years ago. A growing number of multinational companies can no longer afford to separate businesses and geopolitics, and they are under pressure to stop importing them, exporting to, and operating in Russia and its allies. Meanwhile, in response to the recent Omicron wave, Shanghai has imposed what is likely the most stringent lockdown the world has ever seen. Under China's zero-COVID policy, residents have been barred from leaving their homes and apartments. They're not even allowed out for grocery shopping or any medical appointments, and infected children have been separated from their parents. Almost every mode of transportation has been prohibited, making it difficult for retailers to restock and deliver food products. Massive food shortages have been reported in Shanghai, one that is possible, even worse than the one experienced during the Great Chinese Famine of 1959 to 61. And in addition to the massive humanitarian crisis, Shanghai's current lockdown has disrupted operations at the factories in Shanghai, disrupting the import operations across China. And Shanghai is China's largest city and home to the world's largest port, meaning that when it is under lockdown, the reverberations cross the globe. Now, the war in Ukraine and the lockdown of Shanghai mark a huge shift in how commerce happens across the world. It signals nothing less than the end of globalized supply chains. As deglobalization takes hold, future supply chains will be regionalized and more responsive and more resilient. And to be sure, the world has continued to rely on China-centric global supply chains over the COVID-19 pandemic, but this is fucking different. Now, first, unlike previous supply chain disruptions caused by natural disasters, such as earthquakes or floods, the supply chain disruptions from Ukraine and Shanghai are primarily due to geopolitics. In Ukraine, Putin's aggression prompted the West to impose the broad and coordinated anti-Russia sanctions. In Shanghai, a key factor behind the harsh lockdown is Beijing's desire to prove that its pandemic policy is superior to the West. Second, both the events in Ukraine and Shanghai have revealed how critical the global logistics are and how global supply chains can break down overnight. Now, prior to 2022, the pandemic's disruption was primarily limited to human movement, with global freight logistics remaining structurally unaffected. The twin events have major logistical implications. Now, following Russia's aggression, all ocean freights were suspended in the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea, and most air freight was suspended when dozens of countries closed their airspace to the Russian aircrafts. In the case of Shanghai, the port of Shanghai has experienced major disruptions not seen since the beginning of the pandemic. Third, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought environmental, social, and governance, also known as ESG, issues to the forefront, and CEOs are paying close attention to this. The events in Ukraine and Shanghai have heightened the geopolitical tensions, and they exposed various ESG risks of operating a global supply chain. From Apple to Tesla, companies' operations have been severely disrupted in these two countries. These two events generated serious geopolitical tensions, and they created unprecedented global supply chain disruptions. So what can companies do to mitigate both political and operational risks? With American businesses, they can mitigate these risks by leveraging two types of supply chains: a global one that can sustain the growth of their global operations, and a regional one that is more responsive and resilient. Now, China will undoubtedly continue to play an important role in those global supply chains. Now, for regional supply chains, the United States and Mexico-Canada Agreement provides a platform for the American business to develop more regionalized supply chains. Mexico has low-cost labor and a strong industrial base, whereas Canada has a highly skilled workforce and an abundance of energy resources. Furthermore, Latin America offers more room for future supply chain expansion. Now is the time for business leaders to reshape their supply chains, developing both global and regional supply chains, and they can mitigate their supply chain risks drastically. Now, if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. You can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, and for just a few bucks a month, it could help the channel go a long way and further expand it. And thanks for listening.